throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion. Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go. Man there. Touchdown! Touchdown, Carolina! The pistol. Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson. He tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted. Surratt intercepts it. Holy cow, Carolina's going to win. And off to Javonte Williams again. Pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back. Pressure coming. Aguilar floats it up. Incomplete. No flags. Head on back up the mountain. Carolina wins it in double overtime. Loftus out of the shotgun. Throws to the end zone. Incomplete. Incomplete. The bell belongs to us. Carolina wins it 47-45 in double overtime.
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome in to another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast, coming at you live on a Thursday night. And one of the craziest days in the transfer portal in the history of Tar Heel football, as Bill Belichick, Michael Lombardi, and the rest of the player personnel staff that are currently in place are putting on a show. They have landed 4 commits so far today. We're going to talk about all of those guys, as well as the other 3 commits that Carolina has landed in the transfer portal so far, and what we think of this group that's come together here over the last few days. It's still early on. Carolina's still with some really big targets out there that they're going to be going after. And oh, by the way, still have not gotten staff members' names. So even when they get in there, could be some other guys that they potentially target, especially if it's sooner rather than later that the staff ends up getting put together. So we're going to walk you through all of that. I know tonight was supposed to be recruiting. We actually pushed that to tomorrow. Zach Hubbard had something that came up this evening. So, of course, we're going to be flexible, but it works perfect because when you have a day like this on the recruiting trail, you want to jump in here, you want to talk about it. And so, when it comes to the haul that Carolina has on the trail so far, I think, this is a really solid group. Is it one that I think is going to blow people away? Maybe not. It doesn't necessarily have the headliners, not just yet. You don't have some of these guys that have been incredibly productive. There's not a guy like Eric Singleton, the top wide receiver in the transfer portal that Carolina has landed, but there are a lot of guys with potential. That's really how I look at it as we sit here right now. And of course, we told you a little bit about it the other night when Carolina ended up landing Christo Kelly to start everything off. And when you look at Christo, really solid player. I talked about him last night on an appearance that I had on a podcast that's based out of Denver, Colorado, the Fringe Fanatics Sports Podcast. If you guys haven't checked it out, I'm actually going to retweet that here in just a little bit for you guys to be able to go back, check out that episode of my spot on with those guys last night. But that was one of the first guys that they asked me about because that was the first commit. And, I went back, took a look at him again. And, he's a guy that I think has a lot of potential. The thing that I think, honestly, you do wonder about him is just how much playing time he's going to get, being a guy that looks like he's pretty anchored to that center spot. Kind of one of the things that I think for him, you would really like him to show you is that he does have maybe a little bit of position versatility. If he's a guy that can move to guard, then I think you're really working with something there because mean, when you look at the success that he's had at the FCS level with Holy Cross, I mean, the stats are there. This is a guy that, this year did not allow a sack, was a first-team All-Patriot League member, 778 snaps. The run blocking grade, 59.4. Not great, really right around average, honestly, because I believe, from hearing, some people that are more in-depth into Pro Football Focus, they said that's kind of the median line for a lot of this. And then if you're, depending on what side of that you're on, that's how you kind of judge people. His pass block grade, though, really good, 65.4, very solid, as well as his overall grade of 61.5. In the 2 seasons that he has been a starter, he has not allowed a sack. Last year, played 526 snaps, didn't allow a sack then, and also was a better run blocker. So that's something that you kind of wonder, can Carolina and this new staff really unlock what was missing there this year as a run blocker and continue to build on the success that he's had in pass protection? I've said, I said it the other night when we were talking about him too. This really, to me, feels a lot like the replacement for Zach Greenberg. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is a guy that ends up coming in here and contributing. I'd love to be wrong on that, especially if he is a guy that ends up emerging and playing that right guard spot. But, when I look at him, I just think that this is a position he's not going to start over Austin Blaske. I don't see that happening. I think, the thing that you like about it is that it provides you a little bit of depth, because as we saw this year, things happen. You saw Blaske get rolled up on in the game against Charlotte. Zach Greenberg has to come into the game and actually played really well. Now, again, it was against an FCS opponent, but I do think that that's something that Carolina really wants to have in that room. And when you lose both of the guys that were looked at as potential backup centers for next year, Greenberg coming back, could have filled that role. He enters the portal, and you're thinking, okay, well, maybe Andrew Rosinski will end up being that guy. He enters the portal and transfers to Georgia Tech. And so now Carolina, they were left to scramble. Now you got a guy that has experience at the FCS level and is one that, certainly can make a difference for you, I think, especially if Bill Belichick and Michael Lombardi think that he can. He's a guy that could make a difference for you if you eventually need him. You move on to Tuesday. Carolina lands Milcourt Abu Jowdy out of Delaware. I don't know. I forgive me if I'm pronouncing that name wrong, but he is a guy that was not necessarily the most well-known edge rusher out of the group that is currently in the portal. But really, when you look at the edge rusher group in the portal, it's not tremendous. It's solid. There are some guys that I think you really have to take risks on, and this is one of those guys. Here's how you know that he's a guy that Carolina should have been after. Virginia Tech, Pittsburgh, Mississippi State, and Virginia were in on him as well. So, again, is this a guy that's going to blow people away? I don't know if that's the case. I think that a lot of people expected that when Carolina brought in Bill Belichick, that they would be in competition for the best in the transfer portal immediately. When I think, honestly, they're looking at certain guys and they're looking for certain characteristics about them. This is a guy that it feels like the staff identified, they really liked. And, you look at him and, he this year, really productive season for Delaware. 24 total tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss, and 6.5 sacks to go along with 8 quarterback hits. He was in all Colonial Athletic Association. Actually, I believe it's the Coastal Athletic Association now. I believe they actually changed the name of that conference, if I'm remembering correctly. And, he was an honorable mention in that conference. Again, not the greatest prospect that you could have possibly had, but with 2 years of eligibility remaining, I think it's a guy that really they're just taking a flyer on, and they're seeing, does he end up developing? And the biggest thing is that this is a room where you really can't wait around and see if there are bigger names that end up entering the portal. One of the guys that I think Carolina immediately, when he entered the portal, wanted to jump on was Amaris Williams, the edge rusher out of Auburn, who entered the transfer portal, guy that went to Clinton High School, very well known, a former 4-star prospect. I believe in last year's class, if I'm remembering correctly, he was a true freshman this year. He ends up pulling his name out of the portal. And so Carolina, this is one of those guys that, I think in their minds, they kind of looked at and said, let's just add this guy and then see where we go from here. There's guys that are more productive. There's guys that played, at a little bit of a higher level of competition, or that have just done it for more years in terms of the production that I think Carolina, is in on and could possibly end up landing in the long run. But this is a guy, 6'5", 260 pounds. He's a guy that they just, I think, want to add to the mix. And with Kamen Rucker, Des Evans, Jacoby Cowan, all gone to graduation, you're still not sure if there's anybody else that's going to end up entering the transfer portal. When you look at with Rucker, Evans, and Cowan gone, I mean, that's pretty much all your production outside of Bo Atkinson. So Bo Atkinson is the guy that is still going to be there. He's going to have a role for this team, I believe, because you look at what he did, in the second half of the season, he was much better. And I think with a coaching staff that's put together by Bill Belichick that can develop these types of guys, I mean, he definitely feels like he fits the mold of a Rob Ninkovich, that played for Bill Belichick for so long, and Mike Vrabel. I think that's definitely the type of linebacker that he can be off the edge for Carolina. Now you've got a guy in Abu Jaude, who I think certainly is someone that Bill Belichick and this staff feel like they can mold. But again, both of these guys that they are bringing in, so 2 FCS guys right there off the bat, those are guys that you're taking risks on. So I think, you're hoping that it ends up paying off. But those were really just guys that sort of set the stage for Carolina, because then you get Connor Cox, the tight end out of South Carolina. Now this one, another upside guy, someone that I don't really know if you're looking at him as a sure thing coming in, but I'll tell you this, there's a chance that he's going to have to play maybe even more than Christo Kelly or Milcart Abu Jaude for Carolina. You look at the tight end room right now. You're probably going to lose Bryson Nesbitt to the NFL. You are definitely losing John Copenhaver to graduation. That leaves Jake Johnson as the only guy with experience in that room. And so, again, you're going to have to take risks on guys in the transfer portal. I'll tell you, there are some guys out of the FCS ranks that I think were interesting, that had more production. But Cox, I think, is a guy that really fits a specific thing that Carolina is looking for, because Jake Johnson, we saw him in there in the second half of the year. He is not a guy that really projects as much of a blocker at the next level. We saw, the blocking grades, not great from him. He's more of your receiving tight end. And we got a preview of that when he was at Texas A&M with his brother. That was where he really shined, was catching the football and making plays in the passing game. Carolina's hoping that's the same thing for them moving forward, with the groups of quarterbacks that they're going to have, and a little bit of uncertainty at wide receiver. So let him take care of that, and then turn to Connor Cox, a 6'6", 251-pound tight end that might just be the future of this group as a blocker. That's what I think Carolina's really hoping. I mean, you look at the measurables on him. I mean, basically 6'6", that's just an extension of the height that you have along your offensive line, including a guy that you just landed today who we'll talk about here in a minute. And then, at 251 pounds, that's really, really bulky for a tight end. So he's a guy that's going to be able to move people. Last year, caught just one pass for 9 yards in 40 snaps. Actually, that was this year in just 9 games. This was his second year with the team. Did not play in his first season at all. So, again, another guy that you're taking a risk on. But I feel like this one was a specific thing that Carolina was looking for. A guy that has the size to be able to block at a high level. That's something that Freddie Kitchens wants. That's something that, when he came in and took over that tight ends role, he told you that tight ends, for me, they have to be able to block or they're not going to play. And that was something that people started worrying about with Bryson Nesbitt. Would he play if he couldn't prove that he was a good enough blocker? He did enough and was able to get out there. Same thing will probably be that's the same case for a guy like Jake Johnson. This is a guy that fits more of the mold of what Freddie Kitchens wants to help in the run game, be able to seal the edge on some of those run plays to the outside that Carolina loves to run and will want to use a little bit more if they get a back that can really be a game changer, especially a guy like Kanye Udo. That's where he really thrives. So Carolina's going to want to get him out on the edge. You need a guy like Connor Cox that can get out there and block for you. So then after that, you get into today's pickups. And Carolina starts the day. They ended up getting 4 guys in one day. And it starts with a kicker, a guy that's probably not going to blow anyone away. He has kicked exactly 1 time in his college career so far in 2 years. And it was an extra point for the Michigan Wolverines in a game last year, a blowout against Indiana. Other than that, he has not seen the field. But a guy with a lot of upside, the number 7 kicker in the 2023 class, but more importantly, a guy that was a U.S. Army All-American Bowl participant and hit a 49-yarder in that game. They feel like there is a lot of potential here with him. At the least, you add another guy to that kicking room. Best case scenario, you found your kicker long-term, but it's going to at least give someone or give Liam Boyd someone to compete against. Same thing with Lucas Osada. Although, a couple articles that I saw that mentioned the commitment when they were talking about, who he would be competing against, it really seemed like they were focused on Liam Boyd, which is interesting. Boyd did handle the kicking duties in the game earlier this year that Noah Burnett missed. It's slipping my mind right now which game he didn't play in. I think it might have been the NC Central game. It was one of the games earlier in the season. And Boyd handled it fine. But I think he's a guy that is far from a guarantee, especially because you haven't really seen him consistently kick field goals, and he's going to be coming off an injury. And so, Carolina ends up going into the portal, adding a guy in Adam Samaha, who I think, again, it's another upside type pickup, but certainly a guy with 3 years of eligibility that could be here for a while and potentially challenge both Boyd and Osada if he is still in the hunt there. Now, Osada, the thing is that he might be the guy that's going to end up taking over at punter. I think you would imagine that Bill Belichick and his staff probably going to be less than thrilled with what they've seen on tape, what they've seen production-wise from Tom McGinnis. So that could be where Lucas Osada is moving to, and that might be the reason that his name is not being brought up. Osada can do both. Honestly, when he was coming out of high school, I told you guys last year when we broke him down as part of Carolina's early signing class that I thought he was a guy that fit better at punter. And maybe that's what the staff is seeing. And so that would allow Liam Boyd and Adam Samaha to battle it out. I think either one of those guys, whoever emerges, you're just looking for more consistency year over year. Because you look at last year for Noah Burnett, tremendous season, 19-21 on field goals, hits just about everything he looks at. This year, crumbles down the stretch, becomes a guy that Carolina, in the game against NC State really couldn't even trust. And so it may have forced their hand into some of the decisions that they had to make. You're looking for that guy that's coming in, that's going to grow year over year and be a consistent threat for you when it comes to putting points up on the board in those situations. And so hopefully Samaha or Boyd can emerge as that guy moving forward. Now you go to the guys that I think are going to be guaranteed contributors for Carolina, because they've landed 3 guys in a row. I guess maybe the last one is not a guy that's guaranteed to be a contributor, but certainly is going to be a part of one of the most important battles that Carolina is going to have this offseason. You start out with CJ Mims, the defensive tackle transfer from East Carolina, a guy that was originally committed to Wake Forest when Dave Clawson was still in place as the team's head coach. Dave Clawson ends up resigning on Monday. His recruitment opens back up. Carolina jumps in there. They get him on campus on Tuesday, and he actually got in there late night on Tuesday. So then, finishes up his visit on Wednesday, takes a day, and makes the decision that he is going to commit to Carolina. You look at what he brings to the table. He's a guy that is going to be a rotational piece for Carolina on the interior of the defensive line. This year, played 339 snaps, finished with 23 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, 8 quarterback pressures, and he forced a fumble. Last year, 12 games as well, and tallied 14 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 0.5 sack, 2 quarterback pressures, and a forced fumble. So a guy that each of the last 2 years has created a turnover, but most importantly is a guy that as a rotational piece just comes in and is able to clog up the middle and is a pretty solid run defender. That's the area where he really shines. That's what I think Carolina saw in him, and that's what they're hoping sort of carries over as he now moves up to the ACC level. I think it's a good sign, for anybody that's worried, how does he translate from East Carolina? It's a good sign that Wake Forest was in on him, that there were other programs that were conversating with him. And again, he's another guy, 2 years of eligibility remaining. So he can grow even if he doesn't perform the way that maybe the staff is hoping this year. There's always a chance that he ends up being a guy that next year makes an even bigger impact. So this is one that Carolina really needed. I think this is a position group where Carolina has looked. They've reportedly been interested in a few different guys at the defensive tackle position, including a former Tar Heel in Keyshawn Silver, who actually committed earlier today to USC. That was one that I think Carolina would have really liked to have back. I think there's a good chance that he was not really all that open to it, but that Carolina was kind of aggressively pursuing him, and he ends up deciding that he's going to go out west. Wouldn't doubt that the NIL money out there with USC is probably pretty significant as well. But Mims is a very solid overall player that I think will be a nice addition in the middle and will at least be a rotational piece for Carolina at those defensive tackle spots. Right now, I mean, you look at what the landscape of that room looks like. They desperately needed somebody because you will not have Javory Ritzie or Kevin Hester Jr., your 2 starters there. Neither one of those guys will be back this year. The 2 guys that rotated in, Joshua Harris exhausted his eligibility. His final game will be in the Fenway Bowl against Connecticut. And then you look at Travis Shaw, he's still in the portal. And the good news is, if you're wanting to bring him back, which it feels like a lot of Tar Heel fans do, that nobody else at this point has hosted him. It's unclear as to what exactly he's doing. There are some people that, and there is a video that Carolina has put up with them in practice, and you look and you see 2 guys that really stick out. One is a running back that is wearing the number 4, would lead you to believe that that is Caleb Hood. That one wouldn't really shock me because Caleb Hood, I mean, he just hasn't been healthy. He's probably someone that wants to play one more game at Carolina, especially with the fact that there's a chance Omarion Hampton doesn't play in the bowl game, although there are reports that he is practicing as well. If those do come true, then it really probably wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for Caleb Hood to suit up. But if Hampton sits it out, Hood could be a guy that receives extra carries, with Davian Gauss as the only other guy that's really received any sort of significant carries. It'd be Gauss and Charleston French in that backfield. So Hood, as a guy that needs to get something on tape, I wouldn't be shocked if he played. But they also showed a guy on the defensive side of the ball wearing the number 4 who was there in practice. And you're thinking to yourself, is that Travis Shaw going through drills? He was at the introductory press conference for Bill Belichick, but it just seems weird that if he is planning to return, he hasn't made it official. He hasn't announced it on social media. He hasn't announced it to Inside Carolina or Tar Heel Illustrated, unless we've somehow all just missed that. So it's a weird situation going on there. And I think because of that, because he's sort of leaving Carolina in limbo, you're really in desperate straits almost to make sure that you at least get some bodies in this room. So I think this is the position out of all of these. I think there is a chance that they could definitely add another tight end. If they see someone that they really like, that they think can be a productive member, especially as a receiver, I would not doubt that they end up going and getting somebody to bring into that room. Wouldn't shock me if there's somebody that enters the portal that is a almost automatic kicker that's very interested in coming to Carolina, if that's the direction that they go. I know they were very interested in Steven Rusnak. He ended up committing to Cincinnati, and so that took him off the board for Carolina. But if there's another guy, especially someone at the P4 level, that is really productive, that enters the portal, wouldn't shock me if they went out and got somebody there. And we know the offensive line and the edge rusher rooms, they're going to be probably looking to add in both of those areas as well. But this spot, I am certain they will add at least one more person from the transfer portal, if not more, because you look and Carolina doesn't have a commit there in the 2025 class. They do not have enough there on the roster currently. You've got Joel Starlings, you've got Rodney Laura, guys that have potential, Peter Pasansky. There are guys there that have potential, but the depth in that room would be incredibly thin. You would, at certain points, maybe have to even start relying on walk-ons if there was an injury or two. And so that's why I would be shocked if Carolina doesn't look to add more to that room as we go along here. So then you go to the commitments that happened almost back-to-back. You get to Carolina's most significant addition, and that is Alabama offensive tackle transfer Miles McVay. This is one that I compare to Austin Blaske. I think it's very similar. It's a guy that was really just stuck behind some really, really great talent at Alabama. You look, this year played 94 snaps for Alabama, but he was, most of them came at left tackle. He took 66 snaps there, where he was behind a guy in Caden Proctor that is one of the most highly regarded offensive tackles in the entire sport. Just played 28 snaps as a true freshman. So in 2 years there, didn't really play a whole lot. But when he did, is a guy that you could see the size. You really liked some of the things that he did. Now, the grades from Pro Football Focus are a little bit concerning. 45.9 run blocking grade, 44.7 pass blocking grade, and a 45.3 overall grade this season. Now, I think that would probably mean, in my mind, that you don't automatically gift him the starting job. Not going to happen anyways with Bill Belichick here, but I think you are definitely going to want him to prove to you when he gets to campus that those numbers were maybe a little misleading. Maybe being in the SEC, there was a lot of physicality that he had to deal with. In the ACC, not nearly as much, although you do want to be a more physical team. I think this is one that you brought him in. This is a guy with huge, huge upside. Has the size, no question. 6'6", 350 pounds. He is an earth mover. He's a guy that very similar to what Carolina had out there at that left tackle spot this past year in Howard Sampson. More than likely, he is a guy that is going to be a better run blocker than he is a pass protector. Pass protection, probably going to be the biggest concern with him. And so that's why I wonder if Carolina's done there. They hosted Chad Lindbergh earlier today as well, the Rice transfer. Be interested to see how things sort of materialize with him, because he's a guy that is more of a specialist as a pass protector, where if you add him, I think that's the guy that maybe ends up starting out for this year. I believe, if I remember correctly, he only has 1 year of eligibility left. And if that's the case, you allow him to be the guy there this year, give McVay a little more time to settle in, and the potential could be off the chain in the final 2 years for McVay. And he could be really one of those guys that turns into one of the better offensive linemen in this conference. This dude was talented enough to land with Alabama. And I know that this is not Nick Saban's Alabama, but remember, Nick Saban was the guy that recruited him to Alabama because he was there in 2023. There is potential here. You'd imagine with the relationship that Bill Belichick has with Nick Saban, this is one that he probably asked Saban about. Saban probably said, yeah, this is a guy that you should definitely be interested in. And Carolina made sure that they got him. I like the fact that Belichick put his foot down on this one and made sure that they brought him in. And this is one that could work out very, very well for Carolina, especially if he ends up, building off of what he was at the high school level, which was one of the most talented offensive line prospects coming out in that 2023 class. Now you move to the most interesting addition that Carolina made today, and that would be the quarterback spot. So Panther Bo, my guy who is in here, big time Purdue fan. I'm interested to see what your thoughts are on him, because this is an incredibly intriguing guy that Carolina brings in quarterback Ryan Brown. He's a guy that, I don't think anybody really looked at the transfer portal board, big board of quarterbacks and said, that's my guy right there. That's the one that I think Carolina should take a risk on. I think we were thinking more seasoned starters. For me, I was looking at Preston Stone, John Mateer. Carolina talked to him. There were reports today that Carolina talked to him before he ended up committing to Oklahoma. They took a look there. And some of the other guys out there, there were some rumors yesterday that the team was talking with Fernando Mendoza, an established starter at California that ended up entering the transfer portal, really succeeded, looked pretty good at times in his first year in the ACC. You instead go with Ryan Brown, a guy who has played in 9 games in his career. He's only started 2 games, but there is a lot of potential there when it comes to him. I will say the one thing that's really interesting about him is you go back to the first career start that he made, which was earlier this year against a very good Illinois team. And the way that he played in that game would have had you believe that this is a guy that should have been starting the rest of the year for Purdue. That was not the case. It was a weird situation where he was kind of on and off the field throughout the rest of the season. Hudson Card, a guy that was a highly valued transfer portal member a couple of years ago. He, was someone that for some reason Purdue really just wanted to stick by, and they never really gave Brown the full reins. But in that game against Illinois, 297 yards, 3 touchdowns, and also runs for 118 yards on 7 carries. Now, people will say, well, what about his second start? How'd that go? That did not go nearly as well. But the reason why it didn't go nearly as well, that second start came against Oregon, who, as a lot of us know, if you watch college football this year, that might be the best team in college football. That is probably the team that most people favor to win the national championship. I know that's who I think is going to win the national championship, because you look at how good that team has been offensively. They're just as explosive as they have always been, but they've gotten more physical, and defensively, they have had a tremendous season. So this guy was put under a lot of pressure by a really, really good Oregon defense. Struggled in that game, was 9 of 19 for 97 yards, did throw an interception, but also ran the ball really well in that game. So this is a dual threat guy. Probably would be one of the better dual threats that Carolina has had at the position. I think probably would run the ball similar to what we saw from Sam Howell in his final year in terms of productivity. So that's something that's certainly interesting, an element of Carolina's offense that wasn't used nearly enough this year, even though I think that it was something that Jacoby Criswell could have been capable of. This might be the best running quarterback that Carolina has in terms of being able to draw certain stuff up for him since Marquise Williams was here. So I think he's a really interesting guy. It's another one of those upside picks, a guy that was ranked as the 50th quarterback in his class, so not going to blow anybody away. But I think that this is one of those guys that the staff really took a hard look at. They saw 3 years of eligibility remaining. It feels like that's something that they value as well, as having these guys that are going to be here for more than 1 year. They are more than just a temporary fix. They're looking more long-term to build a consistent contender, which is interesting considering that Bill Belichick is as old as he is, but maybe speaks to the fact that they are not only wanting to build Carolina into a contender immediately, but set it up for whoever ends up taking over the program after Belichick departs, which I think if Belichick has his way, if the front office staff has their way, it will more than likely be his son. I don't think that's part of the agreement. I think, we would have seen that somewhere in the contract that he had to be named a head coach in waiting. We had heard some rumors about that, but I think that's probably the ultimate plan in these guys' minds. And that's why they probably want some guys that are going to be around for a while. And so I think that definitely weighed into why they decided to go with a guy like Ryan Brown. Now, I know there are some people that are saying, well, maybe he's a guy that, they're bringing in. Maybe he ends up competing for the job this year. Maybe he's a guy they look at in the future, but could they potentially still add another quarterback? I would be stunned if they add another quarterback. I don't see any way that they're still looking, because you got to remember that this quarterback room now has Jacoby Criswell in it, who was your starter this past year. You have Max Johnson, who started the opener, has started now for Carolina, Texas A&M, and LSU, brings a lot of experience to the table. And as far as whether or not he's a guy that's sticking around because Mac Brown departed, it doesn't seem like he is in any rush to get his name into the transfer portal if he is leaving. And then you've got true freshman Bryce Baker that's going to be coming in and getting into the mix potentially for that quarterback battle. Now you insert Ryan Brown in there as well. So that's 4 guys that could be competing for that starting quarterback job. I don't think it's remotely possible unless you were to see Criswell and Max Johnson hit the portal that Carolina is going to add another guy to this mix. I just can't see it. Especially with Michael Merdinger still on the roster. Right there, Carolina is committing 5 scholarships to the quarterback spot. Putting a 6th one, I think that's asking a lot, especially with how limited scholarship spots are at the college level. So I think they're probably done. I think this is their quarterback addition. And while it may not necessarily be the sexiest addition, I think like a lot of the other pickups that they have made so far in the portal, they are looking at upside, a guy that could potentially end up becoming a star in the future for Carolina. And so I'm going to be interested to see how things pan out moving forward. Will they start to get some of the guys that are more one-year solutions, or are they going to stick to this strategy that they've used so far of finding guys with at least 2 years of eligibility or more to bring into the program. There are some big names that Carolina is getting ready to host over the weekend. So make sure that you guys are keeping an eye on the website, HeelToughBlog.com. There will be visits tomorrow as well as Saturday. So any news that comes out on that stuff, we will have you covered over on the website. All the guys we just talked about right now, you can go back and read our breakdowns of them a little bit more in depth than what I was giving you here tonight. So make sure you go and check those out right now. The website, it has been on fire, just like the Tar Heels have been in the transfer portal. It has been crazy on the website side of things here the last few days. And so you guys really enjoying the content. I know there are plenty of people that have reached out to me and said, we're following along with everything that's going on. And again, I'm doing my best to make sure I get things up as soon as possible. It is a little bit tough kind of juggling, the day job with this, but I'm doing everything I possibly can to make sure that these things are coming out in a timely manner to keep you up to date on everything that is going on. So again, every day when you wake up, check the Heel Tough Blog website for the latest going on in the transfer portal and any other news that comes out around Tar Heel football. Same thing for Tar Heel basketball, a massive, massive game for the Tar Heels on Saturday against the UCLA Bruins. This one, guys, might just determine the season for Carolina and which direction it goes in. If Carolina loses this game, there's a good chance that Carolina is in danger of missing the tournament this year. So we're going to have you covered in all aspects of this game on Saturday. We'll have the preview for you, the recap. We already have the preview up for you on the podcast feed. You guys can check that out, the Four Corners podcast. Already got that preview up there for you guys to listen to tonight once you wrap up here. If you want to go take a listen to that, or hit it in the morning when you're on your way to work, check it out. Get the breakdown for UCLA. We tell you the key is to a victory for Carolina and one that they desperately need. And, of course, any other news around Tar Heel basketball, especially when it comes to the recruiting trail, we have you covered throughout the season. Josh, with those game previews, game recaps, is on top of it each and every game. So make sure you're checking that out. Again, subscribe to the Four Corners podcast. Do the same if you're a listener, even if you're not, even if you're somebody that just watches it, just help us out. Go over there, subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you give us that subscription. It would really help. Same thing if you're watching on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you're on Facebook, just like the page, get the notification anytime that we do end up going live. And when it comes to the Twitter page, I mean, the thing that I would suggest for you guys to do really during this time is go to the Heel Tough Blog Twitter page, make sure you're following it, and turn the notifications on. Because here's the thing. We don't tweet out anything else from that account except Tar Heel news. And almost always, unless I am accidentally on the wrong account, which has happened before, it is pretty much just our articles right there. It is one feed of the articles right there. So that's the best way to get notified that, hey, there is new information that is out. Immediately, first second that it's put up, you'll get that notification. You can pull it up, read the article right there so that you don't miss any stories that are going on around Tar Heel athletics. So that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. I want to thank you guys for watching and listening this evening. And as always, go Tar Heels.